Welcome to Not Another Greek History Podcast, the podcast that aims to be exactly what it says. I'm your host, Onouphrios Dovletis, and together we'll discover the not-so-frequently told stories of Greece's history that will change the way you view things forever. Hello everyone. Welcome back to Not Another Greek History Podcast. I'm Onouphrios Dovletis. I would like to talk to you on this episode about something which, again, unfortunately has to do with a very dark, side of Greece's history, which is one of the attacks, a pogrom that happened against the Greeks who lived in the city of what you call Istanbul, and that we call, of course, to this day, Constantinople. To be honest, I do want to focus on more pleasant things, but you can see, unfortunately, there's been so many unpleasant things that happened. And I think I want to raise awareness regarding some of those things which usually were not known and which Greece never really tried hard to make known over time. So let's get this started. It's September 6th, 1955. A Turkish mob starts attacking the Greek community mainly in Istanbul, but also in Smyrna. Many of them have been brought into Turkey's biggest city, which back then had approximately 100,000 Greeks. Those Greeks were the ones that were excluded from the Greek-Turkish population exchange of 1923, as were some Turks who still live in Greece untouched. The events of September 6th to 7th of 1955 were triggered by the false report of an attack on the birthplace of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the founding father of the Turkish Republic, which now houses the Turkish consulate in Thessaloniki, in northern Greece, in the region of Macedonia. Thessaloniki is also where I was born. A similar pogrom against Jews was also carried out by the Nazis only a few years earlier, obviously, since we're talking about 1955. The destructions back then included over 70 churches, 40 schools, over 4,000 stores, over 100 hotels, over 20 factories, and at least 1,000 residences. Many Greek tombs were desecrated also. After the pogrom, roughly 7,000 Greeks were fired from their jobs. The human toll was over 30 dead, 300 injured, and 400 raped. And there are also reports that they raped even boys. A lot of men, including at least one priest, were subjected to forced circumcision, which we don't do. Turkish writer Aziz Nesin wrote about this, and he said, "One of those aggressive young men would draw his knife and circumcise the man in the middle of the street and amid the chaos. A difference of 2 or 3 centimeters does not justify such a commotion. That night, many men shouting and screaming were Islamized forcefully by the cruel knife." As you can see, the source for this information comes from within Turkey. Some people were even burnt alive. According to foreign eyewitnesses, an old priest was taken into the street, stripped of his clothes, they tied him behind a car, and dragged him through the streets. They tried to tear the hair of another priest, but eventually, because they couldn't do it, they scalped him, as they did many others. The numbers obviously might vary if you start reading articles and books about all of this, but this is a rough estimate. It's the numbers that I told you earlier. The police generally didn't do anything. The mob was shouting a lot of things such as "Onward to Athens and Thessaloniki," which means let's invade Greece and take over Thessaloniki first, which is in the north, and Athens, which is further down. It's 5 hours from Thessaloniki. "Death to the infidels," the Christians. And Cyprus is Turkish. The latter was even the name of an organization which had the name Cyprus, is Turkish, that was founded in Turkey in 1954. So it's happening very close, as you can see. And mainly, that organization aimed at spreading rumors about the Greeks attacking Turks in Cyprus, or that the Greeks of Constantinople collected money to send it to the Greeks of Cyprus, who would supposedly use it against the Turks who lived in Cyprus, which the Turks had previously occupied. And now we get to that. Now we get to Cyprus. Because, believe it or not, Cyprus has to do with this, unfortunately. Or this has to do with Cyprus, to say it correctly. Turkey planned all this against the Greeks mainly because Greece was considering annexing the Greek island of Cyprus. That was against the wishes of the British, who made Turkey part of the problem. The Turks, nearly 20 years later, would invade the island and still occupy the northern part, as we've talked about extensively in previous episodes, which I'm going to put in the description of this episode. At the same time, the Greek population, although a minority, played an important role in the city's business life in Constantinople. That's why the Greeks became a scapegoat during Turkey's economic crisis, which is happening at the same time in the 1950s. So you can see how many things are happening at the same time. This whole thing with Cyprus, with fake news, the economic crisis. At the same time, the Greeks are doing well economically. Out of all the victims, though, 60% were the Greeks. So it wasn't just about the Greeks. 20% Armenians and 12% Jews, who in other instances were unharmed when anything happened against Christians. So this obviously wasn't only about the Greeks, it wasn't only about the Christians, it was also about even the Jews. It was about the foreigners in general. And that was the point, anyway. That's why Turkish Prime Minister İnönü, who died in 1973 and didn't get to see his country invade Cyprus, and he would have been really proud, he even said, "We will cut out and throw away the minorities who oppose Turks and Turkism." Practically like anything Turkish. Keep in mind that during World War II, Turkey overtaxed its non-Muslim people in order to take their property and to force them to leave on their own, practically. Selling the non-Muslims' belongings was a daily thing, and they even sold, which is ridiculous, mind-blowing, whatever you want to call this if you think about this, they even sold jars of sweets that the housewives would have made back then in their homes and would offer them to visitors when they came to visit. So they would sell those things in the streets. And also influenced by its beloved Germany's policy, Turkey even sent thousands of people to what they called labor camps. That has to sound familiar with what the Nazis did. The Nazis made all those places and they called them labor camps. It had already been done 30 years earlier by the Turks again, when they sent the Greeks of Asia Minor, which means the region that is on the coast, the eastern coast of the Aegean Sea, which means now this is part of Turkey, it's the coastline of Turkey, which would have been full of Greek people since antiquity, and they sent all of those people in the depths of Turkey. Turkey is a very, very big country, it's a vast country. But ironically, similar riots would happen again in Smyrna. Smyrna is located along the coast in the Asia Minor area. So similar riots would happen again in Smyrna, just like they happened in 1922, which is when they sent those people in the camps, when the Turks killed many Greeks and burned down the Greek quarter of the city. This is what I meant earlier, that the Jews, in this case, for example, escaped, let's say, survived all of this unharmed. It was only in whatever miraculous way that only the Christian quarter was burned of the city and not the Muslim or the Jewish. Also in 1929 in Constantinople, there had been another mysterious fire that burned down 500, Greek houses, no one else's house, and that Greek neighborhood eventually was renamed from Tatavla, which is the name the Greeks used. It was renamed Kurtulush, which means salvation. They were saving themselves, as you can see, from the evil Greeks and the Christians. Turkey obviously doesn't admit any of this and always tries to distort the truth, unfortunately. These things were obviously not supposed to be mentioned abroad through any kind of press in order to shield Turkey from international backlash, as if there would have been any, but okay, let's say that there could have been. They were trying to shield Turkey from all of this. And keep in mind, this is not just the Turks doing that, because international press would have been foreign journalists who might have covered all of those things. And now we're going to see how writers and journalists could also play a role in this whole thing. James Bond writer Ian Fleming James Bond writer Ian Fleming was present when this happened as a journalist for the Sunday Times. He wrote an article about it a few days later titled "The Great Riot of Istanbul." Nevertheless, his article was an effort to downplay what the Turks had done and describe the whole thing as an outbreak of violence between embittered neighbors with mutual hatred going back centuries. David Mitchell, who has an MA in Intelligence and Security, wrote about this in a very interesting article. He says that the word riot implies spontaneity, so Fleming's choice of words was deliberate. In Fleming's novel From Russia with Love, published in 1957, 2 years after this, the writer even says that these riots, as well as others in Cyprus, were instigated by Russia because he was trying to serve the British interests. It's so odd to see that even novels like this are not so innocent as one might think. We know that the British back then, unfortunately, were actively planning on creating problems between Greece and Turkey to deflect from the secret independence struggle that would have ended the British occupation on the Greek island. And eventually Cyprus became independent. They actually say it very clearly at some point, and they say, if something happened at the house of Ataturk in Thessaloniki, that would mess everything up. Woohoo! Incredible. Amazing idea. And of course, in the end, that's exactly what happened. This article that I mentioned by David Mitchell, I will have it again in the description of the episode, and you can also download it. Keep in mind that on top of everything else, 1953, which means very close to the events of 1955, September 1955, 1953 would mark the 500 years since the Turks invaded and conquered Constantinople, marking practically the occupation of Greece. And they did mention that they intended on celebrating that conquest without any Greeks in the city. The Christians used to be about 20% of the Ottoman Empire. The 1955 pogrom against the Greeks was carefully planned by the Turkish government to cleanse Istanbul of its unwanted non-Muslims. Most of the rioters were brought by train from Asia Minor. They were workers and they were promised money. The police were coordinating the looting, and some non-Muslim owned buildings had even been marked with crosses before the attacks to make them clear targets for the mob to burn. This is quite disturbing, as you can see. One of the two Turks that planted the bomb in the house of Ataturk in Thessaloniki, in Greece. Keep in mind, this is the Turks planting a bomb in a Turkish building in Greece. He had been detained. One of those two people that started the whole thing had been detained by the Greek authorities. But who would have guessed, he escapes to Turkey and is never punished. What do you know? The pogrom created obviously an even greater climate of fear that led many Greeks to leave the city. Now, the Greek population living in Constantinople, to be honest, I will get to the name Istanbul anyway. You'll see what I mean. I'm not saying it. The Greek population living now in the city is estimated at about 2,500 people only. They really, really succeeded, as you can see. The Turks' idea that there are some others that need to be expelled from their land is so strange, because the ones who invaded in the first place were the Turks. The Greeks did not move to those places. The Armenians did not move to those places. The Turks were the ones that took over places where other people previously lived. The Greeks and others, like the Armenians, as I told you, the Assyrians, and so on, they had been living in those areas for thousands of years. Oddly enough, Turkish President Erdogan himself was known as being like a dictator or something. He even called all of this a result of fascist policy. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and share. Until next time, this is Onoufiros Dovletis signing off from Not Another Greek History Podcast.